All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. You are going to be the lucky few that get to see this live. For anybody else, they'll be watching a recording apparently at some future date. And there'll be some disappointed folks around New Hampshire and the world tonight to not be able to listen to this as promised live. But as we said, you know, we're still trying to work out some of the kinks. This new way of living. Cat's out of the bag, right? And it can't really go back in, much though we might hope that it could. So, but in any case, all right. So welcome everybody to our Thursday Night Nature Talk series. I'm Harry Vogel. I'm the Senior Biologist and Director here at the Loon Preservation Committee. A few words quickly about LPC. So this is an organization that was created back in 1975 because people had recognized that loons were becoming less common on our lakes throughout New Hampshire. And the thinking at that time was that if human activities had contributed to those declines, and it seemed likely that they had, then human activities, if they were coordinated and thoughtful, could reverse those declines once again. And that's the hope and the philosophy on which the Loon Preservation Committee was created. We have been working since 1975 to recover this loon population in New Hampshire as part of a viable region-wide population, to use loons as biomonitors, as indicators of the health of our lakes and ponds, and also to encourage a greater understanding and a wider appreciation of not just loons, but the larger natural world as well. And so tonight, we're very happy to have Dana and Bob here. So Dana and Bob have traveled the world and have seen probably more species by a factor of 100 or so than any of us, the rest of us are likely to see over our lifetimes, and have been wonderful about sharing that knowledge with us. They've given many presentations for this Thursday Night Nature Talk series in previous years. We've had them present at the Lakes Region chapter of New Hampshire Audubon, which meets here at the Loon Center as well. In addition to that, they have both been very active with the Loon Preservation Committee. Dana in particular comes every year to our field biologist training to talk about the importance of volunteers and volunteer efforts in the work that we do. And we do rely heavily on volunteers. We have close to 1,000 of them throughout the state, and we're trying to continue to grow that number as well. And so Dana talks about the importance of those folks and the best ways to involve volunteers and keep them involved and encourage even greater involvement in the Loon Preservation Committee's work. And she herself has done that as well, everything from arranging the Tin Mountain group of birders to gently persuading folks at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services Dam Bureau that they need to pay better attention to water levels on our impounded lakes and things, because that is so critical to nesting loons during their breeding seasons as well. Innumerable other things, but the sum total of all of those, that fantastic work over loons for the Loon Preservation Committee caused us to nominate Dana as one of our Spirit of the Loon Award. So you'll find her name up on that plaque right under the Ross and L Wood meeting room as well. And it was just a little bit of appreciation for all of the work that Dana has done for Loons and Loon Preservation Committee, and for the work more broadly that Dana and Bob both have done as well for all of this. So I could keep on going, Dana, as I said, for a long time. Why don't we hold it there? Because we will hold, yes, we'll start off. And I, for one, am very much interested in hearing about hummingbirds. So,
good, wonderful. Okay. Have we started this, Kelly? It should be moving the hummingbird. Not sure. Anyway, Bob and I are delighted to be with you tonight. Hummingbirds are a fascinating member after loons in the bird community, and we have enjoyed traveling around the world, as Harry said, and in North, South, Central America, we've had the pleasure of seeing a great many hummingbirds. Tonight, we're going to share with you that enthusiasm and that delight that we have there. Kelly. She's not advancing. And it's not on. Did we start the slideshow thing? There we go. Yes. species. So this is a better start there. This is a delightful beginning to our talk, and we are just been fascinated. We are in Tuftonboro during the summers, and we have a little cabin on land that my grandfather bought 100 years ago, and we're right on the edge of the pond, spitting distance, as they say these days, and we have our ruby-throated hummingbirds that we see every day. Emily Dickinson in 1880 wrote this lovely poem about the hummingbird, a root of effervescence with a revolving wheel, a resonance of emerald and a rush of cochineal, and every blossom on the bush adjusts its tumbled head, the male from Tunis probably, and her easy morning's ride. And we'll talk about that second to last line in a minute, because Emily didn't know some of the things we know today. Our outline tonight will basically be to talk to you about hummingbirds in general, to share some information about 10 species that have fascinated us over the years, and then to tell you about some of the significant research that's been done. When we usually started a talk, we usually went to the Handbook of Birds of the World, which is this voluminous series of books on the various families of hummingbirds and birds. And wonderful, please come in. My pond is represented. I'm so happy to see my pond here now. And a young biologist here. So as it turns out, as I was saying, we're going to start and talk about hummingbirds in general, and then 10 species that we really are fascinated with, and then talk about some of the research. This Handbook of Birds of the World didn't have any of this research. It was written so long ago that just didn't appear. And so we found, as we research more and more there. So what is a hummingbird? They're obviously members of the Crotchilidae family of birds, diverse, small, colorful, nectar feeding, rapid wing beats, only found in the Americas today. And you can see this picture from 1899 shows a very great many diverse species. And this hummingbird picture down on the lower left, Bob took out in Arizona, and I've always wondered that bird ever get that berry that it pierced off its bill. I was not there long enough to know, but it just fascinated me. I've never seen a hummingbird with fruit before. And so Bob is going to talk to you a bit. This is sort of a song and dance routine here. So he's going to talk to you about hummingbirds. Right.
Move to the
right.
Okay, fine. Well, what I'm going to do is, we have so much information, we're sort of going to have to use the outline to follow it. So I'm going to sort of talk to the outline while you're reading it along and maybe give you some more input on it. Now we're talking about hummingbirds today, and we're not.
Okay, let me.
Okay. Okay, we right now in the world, there's 352 hummingbird species. That's a lot of birds for one family, I'll tell you that. And they're divided up into what we call clades. And the scientists have grouped them as they've gone through them. And they've got these 9 clades, and they're listed off here. We're going to show you some pictures of those things, and you'll sort of see how they work out. Now, one of the birds, if we are going to look for small birds, bee hummingbird is really small. It's only 2¼ inches long. That's just about that much. And the giant hummingbird is 8 inches long. So it's a great range between the various sizes of these birds. Also, the weight, and the next line down talks about the weight of them. And obviously, the bee hummingbird is 2 grams, and the giant one is just 10 times that. Hummingbird bills are something that you have to look at. They vary a great deal, from very short bills to very long ones, 8 millimeters to 119 millimeters. That's a lot of difference. That's about 4.5 inches in the Sunbuil, about as wide as you can read. Here's a little bird with a bill that long. It's really something. And I've seen about 230 of these hummingbirds. Dana's had a few less than 218, but we want to show you a few of the ones that we think are popular. Now, the way it works, the tree of life is the thing that scientists use. And I just want to point out a little bit about it. On this image, you look at the bottom of the screen and you see time. 0 meaning right now, and going back in time, all those things, and the arrows about partway back here, you can see the 50, see if you follow it back here, the 50 line has a sort of a dotted line, so you can see things on this side started less than 50 million years ago. But many of these things do this. But these are all the birds of the world. These are families of birds. Now, we want to, it says, here's where our bird. I can't read that, and I'm sure you can't read it anyway. So here's an alignment of that. You see, the hummingbird is in that group over here, and it's in green. And that's the hummingbird, and Swiss are the one right below them. And you can see how they came along. At some point, they divided up in here, two sides, and the Swiss, and it's divided. What time you come down here, and it's 48 million years ago. That's sort of the way one of these schedules work. And there's a lot more you can do with it, but let's move on to something else. We're going to talk about 10 different birds that we like, out of 250 or so. That's very few, but this is what the first thing is. The Andes form a great part of the history of modern history of the birds. So this shows how the Andes were formed. You can see the ocean plate from the left hits the continental plate, which is South America. It dives down, but it pushes up the Andes Mountains. That happened about 10 million years ago, roughly speaking. This is maybe a more detailed picture, but as it comes down, this is volcanic stuff, and it forms volcanics. As well as squishing them, it falls volcanoes. So the mountains up here can go up as high as 14, 15,000 feet. This is a map of Colombia, the northern part, northwest part of South America. And you can see over there, the white parts in these lines are about 15,000 feet. And we are going even higher than that. This map may be a little bit better. There are 3 ranges, eastern, middle, and western humming. And these are the mountains. And this is where you find a lot of the hummingbirds. Oh, and by the way, right in the very top, under that side, it is a place called Santa Ana. And that is one of the famous places. It's a mountain, huge mountain right on the side of the Gulf of Mexico. These are the areas where we look. Now, the giant hummingbird is one of my top birds. One, because it's the biggest. And it isn't in a clay. It's a group all by himself. How he got there, I don't know. But you see the male is sort of nice, sort of cinnamony and gray, and the female is sort of a dirty gray idea. But anyway, it is in a group by himself. The weight of the bird looks like it should be heavy, but sparrows around here in the yard are probably heavier than it is. It isn't that high. But one of the things when it's so big, when it flies, it sometimes perches and does things. Most hummingbirds are always flying. This bird occasionally stops. It may be the most southern nester in South America. I don't know, but that's, so these are some of the mostest. And this Sunbuil is another one that has a lot of variety to it. One, it's got the longest bill, 10 centimeters. It's long for a bird of this size. It's in the southern Andes, it's fairly common, and it loves flowers, as you can see in this picture here. But there's another reason I've got it in here, because it's a certain thing that goes on. In order for, we'll say, to have flowers, if you ask the flowers what they need to go, they need somebody to move the pollen to start new plants. So the plants have to follow a certain regimen to do that. Hummingbirds will do that for them. But on the other side, what the hummingbirds need is the nectar from these special plants. And so this is called, the two things coming along, it's called a coevolution. The bird and the plant evolves at the same time. And in this case, this thing, and 2.1 million years ago, both the plant that it feeds on, listed down here, and the bird started. We know that, and it spread and worked very well since then. Now, we're going up high, way up high. Los Angeles is up, the canal is up at 12,000 feet. These are a few pictures. You're above the tree line, obviously, and it's cold up there. This is one of the places that you could stay right up in that area, and you can see the kind of plants that are out in front, sort of cactus-y looking things that they have because it's so cold. Now, this is the bird that is up there. It's a pretty little bird called Buffy helmet crest. It certainly has a crest on it. Most hummingbirds don't have a crest like this. It's a member of one of the clades all by itself, and it's in the canal up to 17,000 feet. When we were up there, it was almost snowing. It was so cold. And we were trying to get pictures of the bird. We finally did. One of the things we realized that the birds weren't necessarily just feeding on this plant listed here, that's right under his feet, but also the female eats 2,000 insects a day. It's a lot of insects up at that height. Third bird is a North American bird, or it's found now in North America. And the ultimate thing for it has the longest migration of any hummingbird. Now, most hummingbirds don't migrate very far out there, but the ones in North America have to because they're that way. A few of them that are up here. So the longest migration of any of them, this goes up as high as southern Alaska, and it goes, and when it hits time to go south, it goes south 3,900 miles. That's much farther down than Mexico City. It's way down in there. And so it flies at 25 miles per hour, and it will fly and do pretty well. But I'm going to tell you more about the flying of the birds in just a minute. One of the things that happened a couple of years ago, a team from Yale went out to Colorado where these birds come through when they're coming up in the spring. They need to get food, and they had a very nice thing worked out. The plants flowered and the birds arrived right on time like that. Now, global warming, the plants are flowering and peaking and then wilting 2 weeks earlier. When the birds get here, they look around and they say, where's our food? And so this is one of the things that's going to be dangerous. If global warming does it, the birds have to change.
Sorry.
This is you.
No. Sorry, you get your last.
Okay. Oh, here's our ruby quill. This is the one that you all know from around here. It weighs about 3 grams, 2.5 inches long, and it breeds in an area, probably the largest breeding area of any hummingbird, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Rocky Mountains, from southern Canada down to the Mexican border. A huge area. And so it winters down on the south side of the Gulf of Mexico. Now, here's what I'm working on that I think is sort of interesting, because you could all probably watch hummingbirds out your window or see them at a point. Why do they start migrating from the south in the early spring? What triggers them to come north? And like right now, what now is going to trigger them to go south in the fall? Okay, what I think, they say light, I think it's food. When the food starts wilting, the food that they want starts to decompose, that's the signal for them to move. The males, whether they're going north or going south, leave first. And 12 days later, it's quite a while, the females leave. And 5 days after that, the young birds will leave. So they don't go together by any manner of mind, but they only travel 23 miles a day. Now you say, I don't care how slow they are, they could almost walk that distance, but they have a certain light. In the morning, you probably know if you're up early looking at hummingbirds, they have an early feeding period. And even when they're migrating, they're going to have a morning breakfast. Then they fly and they're going to have a supper somewhere about sunset. So they have to figure that thing. Now, how do they fly? They have a mechanism in their head to do migration. Now, what that does is regardless whether they're males, females, or young, they will fly at treetop level. They're the only birds do it by themselves. They know apparently where they're going to winter down south of the Gulf of Mexico, but they'll leave your backyard and fly along. And if they happen to see some food down on the ground, a good plant that might be a help to them, they'll go down and snack on the thing. And so this is why they only go 23 miles a day, and it's going to take them many days to get down to the Gulf. Most of them will go around the Gulf on the west side. Some of them will cross. Now, in order to cross, even if they island hop, they need to store food. So as they're getting ready, which is about now, they're going to start getting a little heavier, put on a little extra fat that they can use if they're flying over water or something of this sort. But hummingbirds generally don't fly over water, but some go across. They do go, most of them go around and turn around and come back on their thing. Well, those are some of the hummingbirds that I like and some stories about them.
Now we're going to move on to the bee hummingbird. As Bob said earlier, this is the smallest hummingbird. And can we start the video? Jamie, can we stop that?
You're back on.
Yeah, back there, Kelly. This is a little, it is the smallest, it weighs less than a penny, and it's moving on. Right there, Kelly. Good. Now the second one I'd like to talk about is this streamer tail. This is an extraordinary hummingbird. You can see it has this long tail, and it's only found in Jamaica. Robert Sutton was the chief ornithologist in Jamaica, and he told us a story of how David Attenborough had asked him if he could somehow manage to let his Attenborough's camera crew come to Jamaica and take a picture of the mating of the streamer tail. And Robert Sutton said, sure, come such and such time. He knew the mating season of the bird. He got to that point and he said to himself, oh my God, what have I said? They're here, they're coming, and I've got to make this happen. He went to the local museum, got a female streamer tail, tied it to a branch, and within a couple minutes, the male had come in to mate with the streamer tail. Now, it doesn't say that in Life of Birds, but that is exactly how that particular scene occurred. And we were lucky to be able to see it. And there's a lady in Montego Bay that trained these streamer tails to sit on your finger and drink from a Nips bottle. It's quite an experience. If you're down in Jamaica, go to Montego Bay and see this. It's wonderful. Another wonderful hummingbird, we were in Santa Marta. Bob described those mountains on the northeast coast of Colombia. And this is taken by Bob late in the day. They were all gathering food to get through the night. And they're just a beautiful crown wood nymph. They're really glistening. It was so exciting to see them all. But during the day, they, of course, had you rest during siesta, too hot to go out and bird watch. And so we had this room down below the main lodge, and I left the door open. Well, of course, one of those hummingbirds came in. So I had to get it out of the room, and imagine holding one of these, just absolutely beautiful. What a gorgeous bird it was. And then we were in the town of San Francisco in Colombia. And can you imagine a hummingbird mecca? Look at all the red flowers. Look at all the feeders. This lady had 2 stories in this stucco building. And she had, between her home and the home to the left, she had created this avenue of opportunity for hummingbirds. And I think she had 12 different kinds of hummingbirds coming into those feeders. And that was really exciting. You can tell I like hummingbirds with long tails. This booted racquet tail is just a beautiful hummingbird. They call it a booted racquet tail because here at the base of the legs, there are these white puffy feathers. And you can see them just a bit here. And they are in that family of puffy-legged birds. And it has this beautiful streaming tail with these 2 enlargements there at the end of the tail feathers, and feeding up on these red, often tubular flowers. I can remember seeing it so well at Machu Picchu in Peru. It was just wonderful. Now, we have another, there we go. Okay. Another long tail hummingbird. Look at the tail feathers. Look at those feathers. By our bird group to this place. They had to drag me away from there. I was so mesmerized by this bird. Four tail feathers, 2 long ones, and 2 spiky ones. We can move there on the left quickly.
He's courting for the female.
He's courting, and he's trying to encourage her to choose him. video with this music and this. Exotic flowers he feeds from. She is, you can see how very, very simple what she is. Fern-like plant has attached her nest to. Lined with spider webs. Such a simple tail she has compared to him. Now I'd like to tell you about some of that research, now that you've been introduced to some of these spectacular birds. The evolution of ancient hummingbirds is something Bob's going to talk to you about. Okay.
Now, what we've done is pulled this out. This is not in books yet. You see, it's all within the last 20 years, this has come out. And the thing that I mentioned very early on is that 48 million years ago, the swifts and the hummingbirds, the swifts were there, and they started to have some odd-looking swifts turning up in fossils. And they said, these are going to be hummingbirds. They're the ancient ones, called the crown type. Now, notice this, it's at 47 million years ago, but notice the new date in 2003, a fossil in the German area, the best fossil area, decided that this was really a guaranteed bird and was valuable. It had enough field marks. The bill was not right. The wings were not right anyway. Now we moved down to 35 billion years ago. And in the Caucasus, they found two birds, fossils. And fossils of these birds are always impossible to do. And what they did is they got the key. Now, if you think of a hummingbird flying, and it's always flying, but it can fly forward, backward, sideways, up, down, and even upside down. How does it turn around? It has right at the end of the little humerus, there's a ball, like a little giant, tiny thing like a beanie. Something is much smaller than that. And it's because of that, they can move the wings, or they can move their wing structure. So that is the one secret that no other bird has ever figured out. So that goes that way. Now, you see, we're going from 35 down to 30 million years ago, and one more year. Now it's 2005, and in Germany, they got a couple of fossils and looked again, and they said, we're going to put a name on this thing, whatever this thing is. It's got all the characteristics of a modern hummingbird, a better bill, a better wings, the fact that way it can fly, and they said it was entirely unexpected, so they're going to call it unexpected, because that's the name for it. Now, This is sort of dressing on the cake. But anyway, in 2008, which is the last fossil they found, that was the last of the fossils, but these are all the pre-modern height, the ancient one. Now, this is what a fossil looks like. You may say it's very easy to figure it out. No, it isn't. You can get the wings in here. I've done a little with fossils. That is a very good fossil. Can you imagine a fossil of a hummingbird? How could it last 35, 40 million years ago? But this is what you have to work for. Okay, now we're going to go into the next stage of it. Those were the crown, they often call them the crown birds, the original group, and the modern groups are going to be quite different from them. So now I'm moving down to the modern groups, the ones that, like we were just saying a few minutes ago. This Jimmy McGuire is an interesting fellow out at UC, out in Berkeley. He and a team decided to work on this thing. And he published his work after a lot of work in 2014. We've moved up, you see, in the date, but it's still 20 years ago or so forth. And what they did is they took 284 different species of hummingbird. That's all there were then. More have been found since, and worked on those. And his research, you can trace back. I won't talk about it, but if you have a question period and want to get into it, I can explain how they do it. It's rather complicated, but anyway, you start and work backwards. And he proved that 48 million years ago was indeed the first bird. In other words, he corroborated that. But the next thing he found out is the common ancestor of the modern hummingbirds reached South America in 22 million years ago. Well, something happened between 48 million and 22 million. How did it work? The theory, and this is a theory, some people don't believe it, I do particularly, but anyway, where it was in Europe, they left Europe, they went up to across Siberia, across to North America, over the Bering area, and then down through North America and all the way down to South America. It took them 22 million years to do that, and that's how they got there. And but they started to evolve very fast down there, and there's a couple of reasons. One was the rise of the Andes. You see, if a bird is breeding together, it's fine. But if a group gets off and isolated, the evolution of this bird and the evolution of the other birds become a little different. And if you wait long enough, they've been separated, they won't nest together. They can't nest together because they've gone so far, they become another species. So it's that sort of thing. And with the Andes and all the nooks and crannies that they have, you could have an awful lot of ways that a place where they could isolate and do that. So we're talking now in the 10 million year ago period. Now, and I was talking about the coevolution of plants, and I talked one when I was talking about one bird. But you see, actually there are 7,000 different species of plant producing nectar basically for hummingbirds. That business has grown. Now, the last piece I want to do, I could go on for a long way. The last thing is some of them wanted to move up mountain gyms and be hummingbirds, and these things decided some of them would go north. It is not nearly as moist to get up into the southern part of the United States in that area. But the ones that could do it, it was 10 million years ago, that's when it happened. And then when the Panama rose and gave them a land bridge, that made it all the better. And so about 3.5 million years ago, there was a land bridge when Panama came up. And so the few North American birds were increased. Now North America starts at the Panama Canal and works all the way up to Alaska. It isn't the United States the way we would like to think about it. Now, here we go to another one. Here are the groupings called clades along the things. You can see that there's 9 different types of birds and they're grouped. This is a nice thing. They still have the time period. This is now the 184 things that McGuire and his team worked on. They traced every bird back to find out when it evolved. And you can see they made a chart of each of these things. The bottom ones down here are the topazes. They're just this little line I've got here, the hermits above them. And one thing they did is if they're only in South America, it's a full circle. If they're only in North America, they're a black circle. And they can do various things as you do it. So all of these dots can trace down and you can tell how many million years ago the various ones did start. That was the secret of this DNA and the phylogeny that they had. Now, so that you can see a couple of them I'm going to do. You've seen several of the clades already, but the one at the bottom here is a topaz. That was the bottom. Yes, the topaz was one of the bottom. And that's a real pretty bird. Some think it's the most beautiful bird. And back around the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, you know, people wanted big feathers from birds on their hats and this sort of thing. They took little stuffed birds, this ruby topaz, and they probably had 10,000 ruby topaz. That's little pins, and they would stick 2 or 3 of them on it. They didn't quite wipe them out, and you can still see that bird. So that's one. And then the hermit comes, what's the second one up? The hermit is up here, and you can see how curved the bill is. And you see it has developed a curved bill, and the flower in turn has developed a curve so that they feed that way. You see, they don't have that. This thing feeding off a cactus like me, you see, it has a small straight bill. And I threw in blossom crown because that's one the Dana and I had. It's a rare bird. It's only endemic to an area up there in Santa Marta. And it was a very nice thing and a very beautiful one. And it is on another claim.
Okay, now I'm going to tell you about hummingbirds and their quest for a taste of sweet. You will see that hummingbirds evolved from dinosaurs, and dinosaurs do not have the ability to taste sweetness. And birds evolved from dinosaurs. And so we have a situation here where these particular hummingbirds actually evolved, and you can see that they had no receptors for sweets. There was sweet and savory receptors are expressed in a family of receptors called T1Rs. And savories are the TR1s to the TR3s, where the sweets are the TR2s to 3s. And there was a researcher at Harvard. She was just a graduate student, amazing, in 2014. And she analyzed the genomes of 10 species of birds and found that they had no T1R2 gene, no sweet receptors. And then she did a second experiment where she looked at 3 different species, a chicken, a hummingbird, and a swift. And of course, she found out that the hummingbird did respond to sweets. Their savory receptors responded to sugar. There were 19 amino acids that had been substituted in their T1R3 receptor, and they had evolved the capacity to taste sweets. Today, hummingbirds must consume nectar several times their body weight each day. So it is extraordinary that hummingbirds have moved. And you can see that, as Bob alluded to earlier, that pollination is a very important thing that is accomplished by the hummingbird. As it goes and tries to find the nectar, you see the nectary down here at the base of the flower. That's where the nectar is, so that they have to get their bill down into this tube to get down to the nectar. And you can see that because there are different shaped flowers in the co-evolution here, this bird has evolved this enormous shaped bill, and it corresponds to the flower. So there's been great adaptation amongst birds, and of course the pollen is here. So as it goes in, as the hummingbird goes in to get the nectar, it brushes the pollen against it, and it spreads the pollen as it goes from flower to flower. And here, as we know, they love red flowers. I was telling two of the guests tonight that I had a muumuu on, one of those Hawaiian shirts with big red flowers. And I walked out on the deck of my cabin in Tuftonboro, and there the hummingbirds were coming right up to me, thinking I was a great source of nectar for them. As you also know, butterflies also are a source of pollination. And there is an azalea in the Appalachian Mountains down around in Virginia that has these long spikes of where the pollen is out on the tips of these spikes of the flower. And it's interesting that the pollen gathers on the wide feathers of, the wide wings of the butterfly and actually moves the pollen from plant to plant by actually looking there at the edge of the, getting on the edge of the wings of the butterfly. You can see how some of these flowers are so, their pollen is so widely separated from where the nectar is that the wings of the butterfly may be a very important mechanism for getting pollination. Now, another research thing is fascinating. Hummingbirds, as you know, stick their tongue into the flower. And we usually think, most of us probably, is a straw, and capillary action, you suck the liquid up. Well, with the hummingbird, it's not the case. They have a tongue that goes out, and on the edge of this tongue, there are these hairs. You can see them down here. And the hairs actually wrap around the nectar, and they trap the nectar. They pull the bill back into the mouth. They squeeze it tight, and the nectar goes into the mouth. So they're not sucking it up. They're actually trapping it. And there is Alejandro and Margaret down at the University of Connecticut were the two that pioneered this particular research. And we did some wonderful research to show, here are some additional pictures that they developed in their research showing you exactly how this mechanism works with the trapping, and there are the muscles that are used to squeeze it out and extract it from the particular tongue. How much nectar? You can see that their wings may flap up to 90 times per second, the heart rates exceeding 1,200 beats per minute. They depend on this calorie-rich nectar. They need a tremendous amount of energy to do what they do. And they flick their tongue into a flower up to 18 times a second. They easily consume their own weight. And sometimes when they are migrating, as Bob said, when they want to go across the Gulf of Mexico, they'll double their weight. They'll just feed and feed and feed before they take that flight, because obviously their wings are going to be beating that whole time, and there's nowhere that they can get anything in addition there. So they also, though, do consume insects, and they're feeding every 5 to 10, 15 minutes, and they have like a trap line. They visit thousands of flowers in a day. It's hard to believe that when you see them at your feeder. You can't believe that they're feeding at so many others. Why don't they get diabetes? I was always concerned about that. You know, there's so much sugar, it's enough to kill a human there. But what happens with the hummingbird is that unlike the way sugar passes through our body, some of their sugar goes directly into the wings. So they're getting it directly, they're not letting it be assimilated into the body of the bird, into the fat. Others do wind up in the liver, where there are enzymes that process them. But as soon as they take off, they burn off those fat stores that they have made, and at rates that put humans to shame. I wish my metabolism was as good as the hummingbirds there. but it does make you. Now, here we go here. Watch this hummingbird's bill as it comes down. See how it drops the lower mandible at an angle there? And if you look down here in this lower right-hand picture, you can see that the bill comes out and then it drops down, increasing the gape that it could have available to catch insects. And I was watching them, just one today, it was going around under the eaves of my cabin looking for insects. It likes spider webs and goes around and so it's quite an insect feeder as well as a nectar feeder there. Iridescence. You know, you look at these hummingbirds and you just marvel at them. And I don't know how many times I've watched my male ruby-throated hummingbird, and when he turns at me and then just shows off that beautiful throat. But they're structural colors, they're not pigment, which means they're reflected by microscopic structural features on the feather's surface. The structural coloration is iridescent. It varies with a changing angle of light incidence. And the iridescence in the gorget, which is the throat, is due to large stacks, melissomes in the feather barbules arranged in layers separated by keratin. And the color depends both on that Venetian blind effect of the arrangement of the barbules and the V-shaped angular arrangement on opposite side of the bar. Now watch this video. The hummingbirds that will be displayed are listed on the left. So this is our ruby-throated hummingbird. And notice when the angle of the light is appropriate. And now we're looking at the second one here. See how when that angle of the light down there on its chest feathers. This is the one I was holding, the crown wood nymph. So gorgeous. This is a green crown brilliant. Look at that blue, just picks it in the head. Look at that green. Oh, this one, watch. Look at that. This fiery throated hummingbird. And then this is a hummingbird that they split the magnificent hummingbird of the South. Courtship, you may have had the pleasure of seeing Courtship. They are actually amazing how they do it. The female is sitting down here in the lower portion of this. The male makes these huge dives, and when he gets at a certain angle, his throat will be exposed to her in terms of the light incidence and iridescence, and he will impress her. And obviously, the more he impresses her, the more she's likely to mate with him. And if you look in the Sibley Bird Guide in the hummingbird section, he shows that the different diving patterns of the different species varies tremendously there. But it's amazing how much research they've done looking at how that hummingbird gorget particularly is affected by the angle at which the bird is moving in relationship to the seated female here. And I've watched them right there on the edge of my lake going zip, zip, zip. It's quite a fun thing to watch them in their courtship pattern. Now, torpor, it's like a state of hibernation. Hummingbirds have to be able to, particularly those that are up at high altitudes, be able to almost stop having any metabolic action. Because if they did, they would dissipate it so quickly with the cold. And so they reduce their metabolic rate as much as 95%. And some of them are just living in the high Andes. The Andean hill star, which is a species of hummingbird, consumes up to 50 times less energy, reducing their core temperatures to a level that barely able to support life. And here's pictures of some of these birds when they're in this torpor state. They just sort of stop almost. Intriguing. So these are the references that we've used. There's a wonderful book called The Ascent of Birds, which talks a lot about different families. Jimmy McGuire, there from UC Berkeley, the Harvard researcher, Maud Baldwin, and then Alejandro and Margaret from Connecticut, looking at the tongues and how they actually lick up the food. So in conclusion, we hope that you've enjoyed traveling around the world and certainly North and South and Central America with us and seeing these different hummingbirds and learning more about them, both individual species and some of the research that's been happening. And we want to thank Kelly for inviting us and for the Loon Center for hosting us, and to all of you for coming. And we enjoy hearing you. Be sure to give me any feedback or give it to anyone here at the Loon Center. They can share it with me. Any ideas that you have that we could use to make this more enjoyable. It really is a pleasure to have been here tonight and to be able to share this. And if you have any questions, we can either do it now or we can do it individually there. So I thank you very much for. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Can you explain a little bit about what we regard as the aggressive behavior around the feeder? I mean, are they courting, or are they fighting one another, or are they driving other males? What's happening?
Well, I will tell you that there are certain species that are very aggressive. That rufous hummingbird that Bob showed you earlier, that is just a very aggressive species. He wants to take over a feeder. And I can remember I was out in Colorado in Crest, and one of those rufous hummingbirds chased a black chin hummingbird into this A-frame that I was renting for a few days. And there it was, and it got up, way up in the A-frame. And I said, oh my God, how am I going to get that hummingbird out of here? And I looked around and there weren't any ladders. I called the place that I'd rented it from. I said, there's some ladders. I've got to get this hummingbird out of there. Oh, they said, don't worry, the cleaning lady will get it. I said, if I can't get it, no cleaning lady is going to get it. I'm not leaving here until I do. I walked out. It was A-frame on the edge of a hill. I walked out on the deck. Will you believe it? A young man was driving up the hill with a truck with ladders. Stop! Stop! I called him, stop! And he stops and he gets out of the truck. And I said, could you please bring one of your ladders up here? He thought I was crazy, I'm sure. And I cannot believe what he told them in the bars of Crested Butte that night. But by God, he carried them up these stairs. He came into, I gave him a little towel, he caught it, he got it out, and then I could leave. But it turned out to be quite a story. So there are some species that are aggressive. There are, it appears in our ruby-throated hummingbird world, that there are certain birds that think it's their feeder, and they, particularly the males, are driving out.
That's
yeah. And I also know that the ruby-throated hummingbird will mate with more than one female, too. So, and just today we saw a young male ruby-throat that was at our feeder. And he's going to have little speckles on the white throat. He'll still have a white throat, but with speckles on it. So you'll know that's a young male. So watch carefully for the throats, because right now the young will have been grown up enough so that they're discernible for young males there.
But we had two feeders, and we would notice when one was chased from one, he would go to the other feeder. And I just wondered what was happening. What was...
Yeah, they're quite possessive sometimes of those feeders there. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Hey, has anybody ever recorded the sounds that they make? I had one that was caught on my porch. And when it finally slowed down and I could pick it up, it started crying like a baby. And I just couldn't believe that a bird would make a sound like that.
There are recordings of bird songs, but I've heard more like that courtship zip on them. I have never heard a recording of the, I'll have to go listen now and see if there is. Fascinating. Yes, sir.
Do we only have the ruby throat in this part of the country?
Well, what is happening is that it appears, why I'm not sure, but we seem to be having quite a few of the Western hummingbirds that for some reason their internal compass has gone awry and they go east rather than south. In fact, there was a rufous hummingbird in New Hampshire this past week. I forget what town it was in there. And I know, talk about stories. There was a rufous hummingbird in Derry, New Hampshire. I live in North Andover, Mass in the winter. And we went up to see it. And the woman that was hosting it was, this was November. And she was getting very, very upset that this poor bird was going to die. It was getting colder and colder. Yes. She'd bring the feeder in at night so it wouldn't freeze. And then she moved the feeder gradually onto her screen porch to try and give it a little bit protection. And eventually I knew that there was a hummingbird being kept in a female rufous hummingbird in a greenhouse in Amherst. And I knew the Massachusetts person, his wife at that point was the federal Fish and Wildlife person. So I got permission for someone to capture that Derry, New Hampshire male rufous hummingbird and put him in with the female in this greenhouse. Can you believe in 2 weeks she pecked him to death? I felt so badly. Here I'm trying to save this bird, and she pecks him to death. So there are rufous. There are 3 other kinds that have been seen. In fact, the saddest one was Bob and Alan Keith wrote this 463-page book on the birds of New Hampshire, the last 100 years, all the sightings of different species. And they had just published it. And all of a sudden there was a calliope hummingbird, a very unusual hummingbird to be seen in the east, western one. And I'll never forget it. It was cruel. Bob and I went there to see it in southern New Hampshire, and Alan lives on the vineyard. And I called Alan and said, Alan, guess what? The book's now out of date. So cruel. So
I'll add another story to what she was doing about these birds. They have a remarkable sense of place. For example, I would say that the hummingbirds, the male and female hummingbirds that's in your backyard right now, was the young that was there, or the adult that was there last year. They could go down and come back and hit the same spot. Now you may say, that's sort of crazy, but good luck on exactly what happens. No, this is the reason. If a bird like some of them, like the hummingbirds, that should be coming from Alaska down to the area, come down and keep find food down in Florida, we'll say, or North Carolina, or wherever it might be. If they do it once by accident, okay, they will come back there until they die, 5 or 10 years or such. So their ability to remember place and their ability to navigate from where they are to where they should be is well beyond our comprehension. We don't know how it works. We have ideas, but we don't have a real definition yet. They say they do it by the stars, they do it by magnetic fields. A lot of different things have been tried out, but we don't really know how it happens. But the fact is, it does. So you can see it. And the one that had the disaster up here could, if they kept it long enough, it lost its idea as its intent to migrate. You see, they have, the migration is something that they are triggered to do by, whether it's by the food starting to get scarce or exactly what it is. And when they finally, that is not anymore affecting them, it's 2 months later and here's this bird, it isn't likely to leave where it is. It may die that way. A lot of the birds, rare birds on Cape Cod down in Massachusetts, have gotten down there and they don't leave and they may come back once, but that's the end of them. But that happens. It happens to people. It happens. And there are some odd things like that go on.
But that female Rufus that was in the greenhouse, she had been coming to some hanging plants in Northampton, Mass. That's where she was captured and taken to Amherst. And she had been doing that for a few years. Where she went in the summer, we don't know whether she went back to Alaska or not. But somehow she was ending up in those same plants in Northampton and spending the winter in Amherst. So there's a lot that we don't know.
We know off the hummingbird a little bit, but I got a roof coming off the back of our house where I keep our tractor, and every year I got a light in there, and a phoebe builds a nest there. And I keep wondering, can it be the same phoebe coming back every year, or how would, there's a nest there, and why would a phoebe keep going to that same spot every year? And I wonder if it's the same one.
Well, for a few years it may be. I'm not sure exactly what the lifespan of a phoebe is, but it could be and is likely to be. And so that they will be certainly around in the same area. And you see certain species, like there's an eastern kingbird that nests around our cabin somewhere each summer. And they always build out over the lake, their nest. And I can imagine the young eastern kingbird taking off for the first time when it's just first beginning to fly, and it's got to fly over that water and get back to the land there. But they do use the same basic habitat there. Yeah, Harry.
So there are other birds that eat fruit. So like cedar waxwing or something. Do they have the taste receptors for sweet and carbohydrate? Do you know?
I know the Baltimore Oriole comes to the hummingbird feeder.
Yes.
And even now my downy woodpecker is coming to my hummingbird feeder. So a downy woodpecker is eating seeds and suet, sort of. It clearly has developed a liking, although this year the downy woodpecker isn't on the feeder, and last year it was. There are certain species that do translate in the fruit eaters, and there's certain species like that eastern kingbird. It's an insect eater now. It's going out over the lake and capturing insects, but in the winter, it's in Peru and it's a fruit eater. Oh, wow. And last year, when we didn't have many blueberries, he was eating my blueberries, and I was very upset with him there. But this year he seems to be still sticking with his insects there.
So I'm not sure, has it ever been studied? Because I would imagine
I don't know that, Harry. I'll try and find that out. Well, we thank you very much, and we hope you enjoy watching your hummingbirds tomorrow morning. Thank you. Okay, that's yours. That's